Good day. So in the last class, I was discussing about the modern age. Modern age, as I have discussed in the last class, it comprises of the two world war, the Great Depression, the Irish Revolution, okay, the Holocaust. These things actually shaped a very um, troublesome era from 1900 till 1945. This modern age actually led to the loss of faith, the generations, the literature becomes fragmented, the life of the people became fragmented. People were more obsessed with the suicide and death because they have seen people dying in the war, like that of flies or insects. Okay, now once the modern age is finished, I mean, it's we cannot bound a particular age within a particular time period, but then generally it is believed that uh, with the end of Second World War, the modern age comes to an end, and the postmodern age begins during this 1950s onwards. Okay, now what happened in the postmodern age? The first major change was that the British Empire collapsed completely with this Second World War. They collapsed completely. Their power has been seized by the two emerging powerful countries. Who were they? The one was the USSR, Russia, and another was America. Okay, US. So two emerging power came into existence, and the power of British Empire collapsed. That's how the decolonization begins. India got its freedom in 1947, then Nigeria, Ghana, and other countries started to get its freedom by 1960s and 70s. So this was an age when you will see the literature will focus on character rather than plot. Okay, it will focus on character, individual character. You will find plurality of meanings, isn't it? The idea of plurality of meaning and no ultimate truth came into this postmodern age, that there is no ultimate truth, there is no ultimate reality. We are all living in a world of illusion. Okay, there will be a lack of meaning, you will say, in postmodernism. The post-World War theories such as post-structuralism, deconstruction, they are actually telling you about the illusionary vision of the time. Okay, and the condition everywhere in the European nations were quite diverse. While in Britain, you will see that the youth, the young age are revolting against the government. They are not finding any job. They are suffering from this unemployment. The youth of America, on the other hand, they are living a prosperous life. The rise of communism in USSR, Russia, you will see these things. Stalin came into power. He became a godlike figure. So these are the things that were happening on the European landscape. Now, postmodernism shares many of the features of modernism. Okay, we cannot all of a sudden mark a kind of break in between the two ages. Okay, it's both a continuation as well as break from the previous age. So we cannot say that postmodernism begins all of a sudden in 1945, and before that there was this modernism. Every age, between two ages, there is a phase of transition. So from modernism to postmodernism, there is a phase of transition from 1945 to 1950. Okay, this transition took place. So both these schools, both modernism as well as postmodernism, rejects the rigid boundaries between high and low art. Okay, they said there is nothing like high and low art. Earlier, we used to believe that the epics, the tragedies, these are the high form of literature, but comedies are the low art, or some comic novel or some short story, they are the kind of low art. So that distinct difference has been rejected in postmodernism completely. Postmodernism modernism even goes a step further and deliberately mixes low art with high art. It mixes the low art with high art. I have told you in the during the lecture of modern age that the distinction also collapsed because the people who were fighting in the World War, irrespective of their class, they are fighting for the same nation. They are fighting in the same trench. So the class order, the social class order, that started to evaporate. Okay, and this is what you will see further in postmodernism. So the low art and high art mixes, the class distinction is no more there in Europe, especially in Britain. Such mixing of different incongruous elements illustrates postmodernism's use of light-hearted parody, which was also used by modernists. Now, what are the events that took place? The first very important event that took place between the two emerging superpowers, those were America as well as USSR. Now, the World War II followed a long period of Cold War, which begins roughly from 1950 until the fall of Berlin Wall in 1989. So, this Cold War is a kind of uh, nuclear power, you can say, power for the nuclear struggle, power between the two emerging countries who were trying to prove themselves superior over other. Okay, so on the one hand we have had USSR, on the other hand we have America. So they were continuously fighting with each other to prove themselves superior to other, and finally America wins. Okay, but by the time with the disintegration of USSR in 1989, with the fall of Berlin Wall, you will see that the Russia disintegrated completely and America became the superpower. I will talk about this Cold War in the next slides. So then followed a kind of again the war were very predominant throughout the 20th century, beginning with the First World War, Irish Revolution, Second World War, Cold War, Vietnam War. Okay, so you will see war every now and then, even the War of Independence that were fought in India. Okay, so Vietnam War took place from 1959 to 1975, where the Vietnam was divided into two parts, South Vietnam as well as North Vietnam. Now, South Vietnam was supported by USA and North Vietnam was supported by Soviet Union, Russia. So you will see this Vietnam War, everything that is happening in between 1950 and 2000, somehow you will see USA and Soviet Union will be the part of that. Okay, irrespective of what country are into the war, this USA and Soviet Union will intervene. Okay, because they want to prove their superiority. Okay, so they will go and poke their nose in the fights of others. This is what they do in the case of Vietnam also. During the Vietnam War, South Vietnam was supported by USA, North Vietnam was supported by Soviet. Then Suez Canal crisis occurred because see this canal was there in Egypt. Egypt have had a control over this canal, and this canal was a gateway through which Eastern and Western countries were connected. So this crisis actually, the Egypt all of a sudden they stopped the transportation of goods and of ships from that canal. So this led to another kind of crisis or war. Then Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, Jamaica, Trinidad become independent nations. Okay. Like India, they also got their independence from British Empire. Student Hungarian Revolution took place in 1956. Okay. This was a revolution in Hungary against the government, that present government. Then Berlin Crisis, 1961. Cuban missile crisis. This is very important even because this missile crisis was almost it would have become a disaster in the history of in our history of war. This could be the disastrous war because This was the first instance when USA and Soviet Union they were facing each other with all their nuclear weapons. So perhaps it would have wiped out whole Europe if this war would happen, this missile crisis. Then Margaret Thatcher became the first female prime minister of Britain from 1979 to 1990. She was from the party of Labour government. Then collapse of Soviet Union in 1991 and finally USSR, Soviet Union, disintegrated into many different countries and America became the superpower. Now the effects of World War II. World War II had a devastating effect on Britain. About 360,000 British citizens were killed in the war, and great sections of London and other cities were destroyed by German bombs. British economy was shattered, and once again a huge pile of debts posed difficulties to the government. England was forced to recognize the fact that she was no longer the power that she used to be in global politics. Okay, that's how Russia and the USA clearly emerged as the two giants of the world. After World War II, several colonies of British Empire began to increase their demands for independence. In 1947, India and Pakistan were given independence, followed by Ceylon and Burma in 1948. In 1949, the Republic of Ireland and in 1961, South Africa were declared independent nations. Britain adopted a policy of liberalism towards her colonies, and gradually and quietly the empire was vastly reduced. Since the year 1947, the usage of the word dominion was dropped. Instead, a new term, Commonwealth, was used to describe British territories, whatever their status. The Commonwealth countries include many parts of Asia, Africa, and Europe. So, all those colonies, I mean, all those countries who were once the colony of Britain, they were named or they were banned under the same group called Commonwealth. The end of the Second World War marked the beginning of another kind of war, the Cold War. Okay, Cold War, I told you about this. This refers to the mutual distrust between the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc. Almost the entire world was engulfed by the Cold War, and Britain was also involved in it. Britain was a part of the Western Bloc, which stood for democracy. Now, Suez Canal crisis. One of the most embarrassing situations faced by the British government in modern history related to the attack on Egypt in 1956. Okay, Suez Canal crisis took place in 1956. The situation now known as the Suez crisis precipitated when Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal Company. Nasser refused to compensate the British for the share they had in the company because Britain and the United States were unwilling to finance the construction of the Aswan Dam on the Nile. Nasser was the then powerful prime minister of Egypt. Okay, he was controlling Egypt at that time. So Nasser's logic was based on the heightening of the nationalistic pride and the marshalling of financial resources. He said that the Suez Canal is going through Egypt, so we want that tax. Okay, because Suez Canal was controlled by USA and British government. So he said, well, it is in my country. Why not? I will be controlling it. Why the other countries will be intervening in this? So the canal had been serving as an important route to British bases, which now completely changed the situation. Israel, faced with the threat of a growing pan-Arab nationalism, suddenly joined the Suez affair when it attacked Egypt under a secret pact with Britain and France on October 29, 1956. So Britain, France, and Israel combined together to attack against Egypt. The Suez Crisis is often seen as a major turning point in British history. More accurately, it marked the time when the majority of politicians realized that the world had already changed forever because of the Second World War. Even though Egypt was not able to win that war, but the rise of nationalism in Egypt actually led to the to step down of the British and French forces. They finally step down, they go back. Now, the five most significant factors responsible for decolonizations are enhance financial and military liability in the post-war period. Okay, so all the countries have had enhanced financial and military very liable as well as stable. So why do they need any, colonizer? They can rule themselves. They have that much of potential. So that is one of the reason of decolonization. The emergence of the United States as a major power in the international politics, which consequently changed the relation between the Western nations. Okay, and remember, United States was, declared itself as a democratic country. So everyone will want the freedom. Like Britain, United States was a democratic country. Britain was ruled by king and queen, but not United States. So it emerged as a superpower. Now, every other country started to follow United States because they have seen that they are very much progressive because they are democratic country. So later on, you will see other colonies who got their freedom, they started to follow the same democratic way of rule. Organized resistance movement in the colonies and the increased demand for self-determination. This is also one of the cause. Opinion favoring the granting of independence to the colonies in Britain. Okay, most people agree that okay, it's time to give freedom to the colonies. The United Nations Declaration on Decolonization and America endorsement of it. Finally, they declared that now you have to give freedom to all those colonies. If they want freedom from you, give them freedom. Okay. So this become a kind of decree or pact during the United Nations Declaration on Decolonization in 1960. After World War II, several colonies of the British Empire began to increase their demands for independence. And what happened? These countries got their freedom. Now, the process of decolonization was not that doesn't happen overnight. It took almost 10 to 20 years, even for some countries 30 to 40 years. So firstly, the growth of nationalism in many of the colonies could no longer be ignored. Okay, especially uh, you can take the example of India itself. The sheer rise of nationalism actually led us to get the freedom. So the growth of nationalism, you cannot suppress nationalism because it's not just an individual feeling. It is the mood of entire nation. You cannot suppress entire nation. The second condition associated with decolonization is the suddenness with which it happened. Even a century prior to India's independence, for example, the nationalist movement had failed to consolidate into a worthwhile body, while by the beginning of the 20th century, the resistance found its voice and fervor. See, the nationalist discourse, the fight for freedom, started with the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857, but then we were suppressed. Okay, but by the time it was Second World War, British Empire was already very weak. They have invested on this war so much. They were already in debt. Okay. Now they have had no options. They have to give freedom to the colonies. And they also promised to the colonies that if they will fight on their side during the World War, they will give them freedom. So they need to keep their promise. The third aspect about decolonization is its unpredictability and indeterminacy. It is impossible to suggest a formula to effectively explain the time scale involved in decolonization. This is what I said, that you cannot explain decolonization that it happened overnight. It started with, you can say, during the Sepoy Mutiny, and it goes on to 1947 in the case of India. In the case of Nigeria, Ghana, it goes on to 1960s. In the case of Africa, it goes on to even 1990s. So it's a long period. This process of decolonization is different for different country. The whole process is different for different nation. So the process of decolonization in India cannot be compared to any other nation. You cannot compare it. Fourthly, not all colonies achieved independence through the same methods, isn't it? We got our freedom through protest, through mutiny. Some got through war. Okay, some got through mass killing, massacre. So it implies that different local factors along with the nature of the colonizer colonized relation contributed to the variety of situations which were not in imitation of each other in the colonies. Finally, decolonization has hardly been a smooth affair. In many colonies, the violent aftermath suggested that things were not easy even during the departure of the British. Okay, even in the case of India. Although British government departed from India in 1947, what happened next is that what followed next is the killing or massacre of the religious fanatics in the name of religion, the separation of India and Pakistan. Almost 2 million people were displaced. So many of people were killed. So this idea of freedom and decolonization was not so smooth and I mean merry-making kind of situation for all the nation. Some have paid a very huge price for this freedom, like that of India and Pakistan. Now, writers like Graham Greene and W.H. Auden continued to write after World War II ended. Some of the important post-war writers were George Orwell, J.D. Salinger, Ernest Hemingway, and William Golding. They were writing during the modern age as well as postmodern age. During the 50s, a group of writers expressed their dissatisfaction with traditional English politics, education, and literature. These writers were known as the angry young men. Okay, they included the dramatist John Osborne and the novelist John Gray. Osborne's play Back in Anger 1956 describes a young working class man's resentment of the British class system. Okay, so this resentment you will see in each of the member involved in the angry young man movement. Other writers whose works reflect the changes in English society included Sir C.P. Snow and Anthony Powell. In America, there was a spurt of dramatists who became popular in England. Arthur Miller, Tennessee Williams, and Eugene O'Neill were some of the dramatists whose plays were welcomed by the people. Cinema attendance reached a peak during the 1940s. The film of Alfred Hitchcock and classics such as David Lacan's The Bridge on the River Kwai contributed greatly to this. Cinema continued to remain popular through a slow decline began to set in during the early 50s due to the advent of television. Okay, cinema was a major way that time because that time the theater were almost closing. Okay, people were no more interested in the old traditional theater. There were theatrical performance, but they were organized occasionally. But cinema was very powerful during that time. But with the emergence of television, cinema also slowed down with time. Then let us see the post-World War theories. What are the theories that emerged during the post-World War landscape or scenario? So structuralism, post-structuralism, deconstruction. Post-structuralism and deconstruction are almost same. Okay. Because post-structuralism challenged the structuralism and from post-structuralism emerged Derrida's deconstruction. Okay. Then cultural studies came into forefront during the 1960s and 70s. And with cultural studies, new historicism also overlaps with that phase only. Now, what are the characteristics of postmodernism? Apart from this theoretical advancement, there is an ambiguous and multiple interpretation that you will see in the text. For example, John Foss, the French left-wing movement. What happened? By the end of the novel, the author is providing you with three endings. Okay? Even author appeared as a character in that novel. So ambiguous and multiple interpretation. Modernist and postmodernist works are also fragmented and do not easily directly convey a solid meaning. That is, these works are consciously ambiguous and give way to multiple interpretations. The individual or subject depicted in these works is often decentered, without a central meaning or goal in life, and dehumanized, often losing individual characteristic and becoming merely the representative of an age or civilization like Tiresias in the Wasteland. So you will see the ambiguity in the text during the modern age as well as postmodern age. Okay, ambiguity in the text. You cannot come to a final conclusion. This is what post-structuralism and deconstruction said, that there is no any ultimate truth or reality. We always try to give a structure to everything that exists in this world, like that of a circle. Circle has a center. It has a particular structure. This is what structuralism said. But the post-structuralism said that there is no center to anything. The moment you are going to, you are searching for center, you are actually looking for alternative. There is no center or ultimate reality at all. Instead, there are multiple realities, multiple truth, and multiple structures. For example, when you will peel off the onion, by the end of this peeling off, you will find no center at all. There is no center of an onion. Okay. In the same way, for instance, if I'm referring to a word, particular word, suppose I'm saying talk. Talk, what are the synonyms of talk? Speech, speak, say, okay, and the list will go on. So we won't be reaching to a final meaning of this word talk. It will be forever deferred. This is what Derrida said in his theory of deference. What he said, that each word has a different meaning, which is always differing, different and differing. This is what he termed deference, which was the very core idea of deconstruction. Different as well as differing. It will continue. It will go on till infinity. You cannot come to a final meaning of a particular word. Free play of word, what he termed as free play of words. Postmodernism and post-structuralism recognize and accept that it is not possible to have a coherent center. In Derridian term, the center is constantly moving towards the periphery and the periphery constantly moving towards the center. In other words, the center, which is the seat of power, is never entirely powerful. It is continually becoming powerless, while the powerless periphery continually tries to acquire power. As a result, it can be argued that there is never a center, or that there are always multiple centers. This postponement of the center acquiring power or retaining its position is what Derrida called deference. In postmodernism's celebration of fragmentation, there is thus an underlying belief in deference, a belief that unity, meaning, coherence is continually postponed. Now you will see in the postmodern literature the deconstruction of meta-narratives. The modernists believe in order, stability, and unity is what the postmodernism thinker Lyotard called a meta-narrative. We have made a kind of meta-narrative of everything. Okay, grand narrative. That okay, the epic we will consider epic as a grand narrative. We will only tell about the upper class people. We will talk about myths. Okay, the great legends such as for instance the um, legends and myths of Zeus or Greek mythology, the War of Troy. These are all the kind of meta narratives, grand narratives. So postmodernism questioned this particular meta narrative. They deconstruct this meta narrative. They said, why we will follow these meta narratives? Okay, we should go to the local narratives also. We should talk about the individual person, the person who is facing difficulties in the daily life. Why we will always talk about meta narratives or grand narratives? So, postmodernism understands that grand narratives hide, silence, and negate contradictions, instabilities, and differences inherent in any social system. Postmodernism favors mini narrative instead of grand narratives. Okay. Postmodernism favors mini narratives, stories that explain small practices and local events without pretending universality and finality. Okay, having deconstructed the possibility of a stable, permanent reality, postmodernism has revolutionized the concept of language. Because earlier, we have this belief that language has a fixed meaning. But what postmodernists said, what the deconstructionists said, what Derrida said, that every unit of language refers to every other word. the free play of word. So there is no ultimate fixed meaning. I mean, this particular thing also raise a very vital question that whether language speaks us or we are speaking language. Okay, isn't it? It's very paradoxical question. If you don't know language, you won't be able to communicate. But if you know language, you are able to communicate. This means that language is speaking us. Language is a medium through which we are speaking. So whether we are speaking language or language speaks us, a very paradoxical question, and you won't be able to come to the final concluding meaning or answer to this question. So modernism considered language as a rational, transparent tool to represent reality and activities of the rational mind. In the modernist view, language is representative of thoughts and things. Their signifiers always point to signify. But in postmodernism, there are only surfaces, no depth, no ultimate reality. For instance, suppose I went late, I went to my class. I'm going to traveling to my college. I have to attend a class, but I was late there. So my professor asked me, why you are late? I said, I saw someone, um, yeah, um, someone went through an accident, so I was helping that particular person. So your professor will say, okay, fine, you can sit in the class, attend my class. Okay. Actually, the thing is that I have actually told him the lie, not the truth. But for my professor, that is the truth. Okay. To save myself, I told him a lie, but he believed me. For him, it is the truth. So for me, it is a lie, but for him, it is a truth. So there is no ultimate truth at all. There are different versions of truths. Okay? So there is no ultimate truth or reality because I have given you one example that I am telling a lie, but that lie can become for someone else the truth. This is the free play of language. There is no ultimate reality, ultimate truth. You cannot stabilize the language. In other words, in postmodernism world, there are no originals, only copies, no territories, only maps, no reality, only simulations. Okay? Baudrillard say, Baudrillard, he said this concept of simulation. Now, what are the effects of the Cold War? Let us come to the history again. The Cold War is the term used to describe the extreme political unfriendliness that existed from the end of World War II to the late 80s between the groups of communist and non-communist. Okay, communist were the USSR, the non-communist were USA, British Empire, and other countries. On one side were the USSR and its communist allies, known as the Eastern Bloc, and on the other side were the Western power of the USA and its allies. There was mutual suspicion, distrust, and misunderstanding between the two blocs, the Western Bloc as well as the Eastern Bloc. The USA and its allies felt that the USSR's aim of spreading communism throughout the world threatened their security and economic interests. The Soviet, on the other hand, accused the USA of practicing imperialism and of attempting to stop revolutionary activities in other nations. Each bloc had its own political ideas, which were diametrically opposed to each other. I told you that this phase of postmodernism also gave rise to the new ideologies and philosophies such as communism, socialism, fascism, then democracy, imperialism. So that is the reason why the two blocs were suspicious about each other. One is thinking that the other is trying to spread communism. Another is thinking that another country is trying to spread imperialism. So they were distrustful of each other. Soon after World War II, the two great blocs were formed and the Cold War began. It intensified during the 1940s and 50s and reached its peak in the 1960s. World peace was severely threatened. the arms race began afresh, with both sides experimenting with nuclear weapons. At the same time, there was a space race between the USA and the USSR. The world watched its in astonishment as America and the Soviets tried to outdo each other in conquering space. In 1940s, the arms race between the two blocs began and continued in the 1950s. The Berlin Wall was a symbol of the confrontation between the two blocs, and that Berlin Wall finally collapsed in 1989. In the 60s, the world came dangerously close to a nuclear war, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, nuclear war. An attempt was made in the 70s to improve relations between the USA and the USSR. The Cold War took a fresh turn in the 80s when Mikhail Gorbachev took over the leadership of the USSR. When Margaret Thatcher became the Prime Minister in 1979, she paved the way for an economic revival and sought to avoid any public conflict with the USA. Through her personal friendship with President Reagan of USA, she was able to make Britain's position more respectable. Up to 1982-83, Thatcher continued to repeat the anti-Soviet rhetoric of the Reagan administration. She was known as the Iron Lady in USSR. After she was re-elected in 1983, she changed her approach. The British government began to establish contacts with the Warsaw Pact countries. The Warsaw Pact was a treaty signed by the communist nation of Europe that were under Soviet military command. They were Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Romania. First, Thatcher paid a visit to Hungary and later she went to Moscow. Okay. She was trying to build a relationship with both USA as well as USSR because those were the powerful countries at that time. The breaking of the Berlin Wall in 1989 was a symbolic act which signaled the end of the bitterness between the power blocs. The Cold War became a thing of past with the disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1991, and finally, America emerged as a superpower. What are the key terms associated with postmodernism? Pastiche, intertextuality, metafiction, temporal distortion, minimalism, maximalism, magic realism, factions. These are all the key terms associated with postmodernism. You will find the use of pastiche, intertextuality, metafiction in French Lift and Movement, written by John Fowles, and also magic realism in the works of Angela Carter. Then you will find magic realism and maximalism, minimalism in the works of Muriel Spark. So these are the key terms. Read it in detail, especially from net point of view. This is the chronology. The 1950s was the age of austerity. 1960s was the age of youth. You will see many youth organized movements are going on in Hungary, in France, even in Britain. So 1960s was the age of youth. 1970s was an age of anxiety. People were disgusted with the economic crisis as well as the unemployment. 1980s was the time of age of new materialism, rise of consumerism culture. The 1990s an age of recession and preoccupation. These are the important post-war British fiction and fiction authors, the authors of this fiction. Doris Lessing, William Golding, Graham Greene, they were writing during 1950s. During 1960s, John Fowles, Angela Carter, Muriel Spark, Angus Wilson, John Berger, they were writing. During 1970s, Irish mood dog A.S. Bate were writing. Ian McMahon, Martin Amis, Jeanette Winterson, Julian Barnes, Salman Rushdie, Graham Swift, Kazuo Ishiguro, Timothy Moore, they were writing during 1980s. Okay, so that's it for postmodern. If you have any doubt, you can ask me. Uh, and with this, I will begin um, uh, 2, 3 lectures I will give on American uh, history before the Civil War, until the Civil War, and then this course will finally end. Thanks for watching.